that I can be excited about. But for me personally, there's not a lot of like products in this lineup that I'm like itching to go out and upgrade or check out or try. Okay. I know what I said. Disappointing, probably not gonna upgrade, all that stuff. Yet, here we are. Hey, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, Adrian here for Digital Dojos. So in my defense, a couple of things did change. I did decide to ultimately upgrade from my 15 Pro Max to the 16 Pro Max. And before even diving in, I think I can still say that from this perspective, you don't need to do this if you're coming from this route. However, like I said, I try to think of it holistically from the perspective of the average user who doesn't upgrade year after year. I did not need to do this. I want to make that very, very clear right now. That said, a couple things did help out. I'm going to be donating this phone to a family member, so that works out because I need a new phone. So it kind of just pushed me to do it anyway. And now I get to do a video for you all and get a review out for you all so you don't make the same mistakes that I do. And on top of that, if it wasn't clear already, I've been very bad at not upgrading year every year. This is just a small sample of the phones that I still have. So what I'm truthfully most interested to see in this case is the size difference, because the 16 Pro Max is technically slightly bigger due to how they did the bezels. It makes the screen just like a little bit bigger. And with the way they've adjusted it, a lot of people are saying like it just feels larger, and it is like dimension-wise just like slightly wider, slightly taller than last year's 15 Pro Max. But I'm curious to see somebody who's going purely from a Pro Max to a Pro Max if I'm really going to feel or notice a difference. So let me set aside this box here. This box can also be used if I want to return my old phone, but we are not, as I mentioned, and here we have it. I mean, the other thing that's notable about iPhones year after year, and no surprise here, like the packaging is just getting more and more minimal. I remember the days where they used to include like everything under the sun, the adapters, the headphones, all of that. No, now you're paying more and arguably getting a better phone, but they take away all the accessories and whatnot. But yeah, this is the iPhone 16 Pro Max, and as you can see, it just says iPhone on it. So I do have the 16 Pro Max in the desert color, and we're going to go ahead and just pull the tab here. Shoot, I should have got the ASMR for you all. Up, we have a bottom tab. Have no fear. So, go ahead and pull that bottom tab. Not as satisfying, but with that, we'll go ahead and let the phone slide out. Ooh, that does feel hefty and heavy. And then here we have that desert color, which is like a champagne gold, like an off gold. A lot of people are saying it looked more brown in person, and I will say it's much lighter than I anticipated. I almost thought there was like a film on this, but it is very adjacent to like the previous champagne color, to be honest. And Apple nowadays are just like calling these colors all sorts of different things. But here we have the phone. I'm going to set that aside. We do now have, which is different, a braided USB-C cable for charging. So this is very similar to like the MacBooks. I don't believe that came with my iPhone 15 Pro, if I recall correctly. So yeah, USB-C to USB-C braided cable. Then you have this like oblong oval user manual. And unfortunately, I believe we're out of the era of Apple stickers. So that's literally all you get. You get the cable, you get the phone. But that's the unboxing experience. And then last but not least, we have the famous peel. Let's see if I can position the microphone appropriately here. Oh. Okay, that wasn't satisfying at all. Now, one thing I considered this year, if you don't know, for the last like 3 or 4 phones, I've tend to gone caseless. I just like how natural the phone feels and lightweight and no real like obstructions. But with that, this year I did debate going with a screen protector, and I might still pick this up in the like week to come. But reason being is like the only noticeable damage I've had on my 15 Pro Max is a slight kind of scuff in this bottom corner here. That could be from like something in my pocket or anything. Otherwise, like these phones nowadays and the Sapphire screens are very, very durable. So here's the thing, saying it side by side, you can see there is a bit of a difference. Look, this Pro Max phone is like already a big phone by all standards. Like we are entering, if we weren't already, like in this phablet like era of flagship phones, and because there's phones that are even bigger than this, and like never would I have thought, because I used to enjoy that small form factor one right here, the what is it, the 4 and the 4S and all these models. This was like my favorite form factor back in the day, and this was my actual phone with the skin on it. Look at that in comparison now to the 16 Pro Max. I mean, it looks almost like a toy, but it also shows you how far we've come in phone culture. Standard version, or sorry, the 16 Pro, just the standard version, but ultimately settled for the Max, and here we have it. So notably, the thing that is most different, of course, is the new addition of that new snapshot button, whatever you want to call it, the camera. I almost want to call it the action button, but again, it is an actual button. It clicks, and it has that capacitive glass to it. So you can hear me clicking it there. But yeah, let's go ahead and just turn it on out of the box here. So, I mean, just holding it in hand, slightly heavier. Just this is a full, like, eye test, and I believe this is purportedly supposed to have a bigger battery, and like it's definitely bigger. It's not only like taller, it's wider than the. It's kind of hard to see here, but there you go. Like that's a good difference there. You can kind of see how they differ in terms of the height difference. That said, obviously I'm used to this form factor because I have a Max, but it is definitely bigger, right? Like you have to consider if you're going to keep this like in your pocket or a bag or a purse or what have you. Like this is a chunky phone. And the bezels have been shrunken down notably too. So here you can see kind of side by side, the bezels are definitely smaller overall on the phone, which does kind of give that almost edge to edge full screen experience. Like we're nearly there at this point. I will say like the whole notch thing, still unfortunate. I feel like how clean and seamless this looks, and for what the notch is, I just haven't used it as much, or it has, I know you can do some stuff there, but otherwise I think the screen obviously looks great. We're gonna go ahead and keep the appearance as default here. You can adjust, and nowadays I used to do fresh installs for all of my phones just to kind of start fresh. But the transfer methods have honestly got it so easy nowadays and convenient where I honestly just mirror it over. So we're going to go ahead and let it do its thing here. We're going to go ahead and continue. Living life on the edge. Oh, does that say 2 hours? Might have underestimated the time that was going to take, and maybe we should have gone with iCloud. But I guess we gotta wait, and probably should plug my other phone into the charger. I kid you not, we are back, and the phone has fully transferred over. So I am, signed in, and I'm sure I have to adjust some stuff, and yeah, everything's going to start to want to notify me and get updated here. But for all intents and purposes, the phone is set up. I'm sure I'm going to have to do some adjustments, like I said. But again, the screen looks noticeably just bigger, especially with those like thinner bezels. I do think that is like one of the nicer aspects of this minimal but noticeable. Overall, I will say the screen size for me coming off of the 15 Pro Max, or sorry, the overall like dimensions doesn't feel crazy. One of the notable things here is how low the brightness can now go, and it's kind of hard to tell here. I know this isn't like a true apples to apples comparison, but this is noticeably or I guess not brighter, but less brighter. This can go down to, what is it, like 1 nit now. So like in low light, if you're really trying not to like disturb or have your screen like blast in your face, this is noticeable here, like the lower screen brightness. So for those of you who care about that, that is a thing with the newer phone. And I do want to take a look at this new shutter button. You also have this new photographic style. I'm going to set that up later. But, I mean, here we have it. I'm just going to take my first test photo here of all the iPhones of years past. kind of stacked on each other. We'll go ahead and set that up here and take a picture. And you can see here I can control the zoom just by, I'm kind of out of camera, so you can't really see that. But I'm going to go ahead and just take a picture here. So there's a couple things. I want to hold it like I would hold it normally, so I know this is kind of a weird angle, but I wanted to see first off how hard it is to press. And it is like a legitimate press. It's not like a tap. For some reason, since it was touch capacitive, I thought it'd be like a tap. It's just, it is an actual press. Like you are pressing like a tangible button here. So line it up again, take a picture. And then the actual like touch sensitive capacity to get it to like the 0.5 or the zoom in, that's smooth. Like that is just like a, seamless, almost like swipe. And it has these little kind of like slight haptic feedback depending on where you're landing on the zoom. Outside of that, I mean, yes, it's you can do this with one hand if you're shooting vertical or portrait. Is it that much more different than hitting the shutter button here? Time will tell. But is it going to be like the action button where like it rarely gets used or what have you? I think the one thing I'll give it is that a lot more people use the camera. So I think naturally like it will get used more because like that's a big reason people get iPhones is to use the camera. Now something else that is technically new is the ability to shoot in 4K 120, but I think you have to enable that in the settings. How many people are gonna use that? Who knows? But it is there fast. I know it's hard to tell here, but I'm gonna go ahead and record a little bit here. So this is 4K 120 FPS. Look at the quick and fast movements. In, out, and you will be able to see that footage overlaid here. And for those of you out there who care about the kind of tech spec side, I have Geekbench loaded up here, and you can see, at least at a hardware level, you have the iPhone 16 Pro sporting the new, chip at 4 gigahertz, with the A17 Pro here sporting the 3.78 gigahertz chip. And we can go ahead and run that CPU benchmark just to see how they stack up side by side. And at least on the CPU side, you can see here that clearly the new 16 Pro outscores on both the single core and the multi-score. You have about 3,344 compared to 2,794. And then the multi-score, 7,933 to the 6,907. And on the GPU end or the graphics end, those metal scores, you can also see the notable difference here, 32,864 compared to the 27,987 on last year's generation. All right, and with that, I figured just to kind of recap here, as I've had a little bit more time spent with the device and actually getting it set up and using it a little bit and comparing it to my 15 Pro Max. I understand the comparisons here, and my perspective are impressions from somebody who is coming from a previous generation. And the privilege of that is also shadowed by the fact that when you upgrade year over year, everything is going to feel to some degree incremental. And that's why the previous generations of phone upgrades for me, from the 13 and the 14 and the 15, feel in most regards a lot of the same. I mean, the design language in themselves from the 15 to the 16 have remained the same. So let's start there. The physical footprint of this phone feels no different to me. It is slightly bigger, and yes, I can notice it, especially when I'm even holding it side by side on my previous phone here, but it's not big enough where it feels drastic. I think if you're coming from older phones or non-Max phones, this is going to feel big, and I would highly recommend you either get a friend who has a Max model for the 16, or you go in store, better yet, and truthfully try it in your hands, feel the weight, see if this is something you'd really like, because this is going to feel really big to a lot of people and might be too big for some people, and that much more noticeable. Again, for somebody who's coming from the 15 Pro Max, kind of used to it, the weight, the size, all that good stuff. Physical footprint, like I said, feels mostly the same, just the addition of that camera button. And that's actually one thing I was worried about and curious about was, with this camera button, could you accidentally trigger it, even the zoom function? Because the zoom function doesn't need to be triggered by a push, it's just a swipe. But what Apple did here is it looks for you applying pressure. So even if you're holding the camera the old way, if you're covering that button It's not going to accidentally trigger if you're holding it in landscape mode and your fingers are up here, but you're still using the traditional shutter. It's not going to trigger. But when you put a little bit of pressure on that button, you will see that the zoom kicks in. And if I physically press the button, it's going to take a photo. So that was one thing physically that was good to see, that it's not going to cause like accidental triggers or inputs, at least in my initial testing. In testing the phone itself, outside of like the initial benchmarks and stuff, I know it's faster. I know the internals are faster, but it's not something that I'm going to notice at face value, right? Because coming from the previous generation, the 15 Pro Max to me was never slow or, hindering my day-to-day usage of it. I'm sure if I was downloading and playing the AAA titles that are on this phone and that you can get in the App Store nowadays, you'll see that benefit on the high end of the new chips and the new performance. But for how I use my phone on a daily basis, I'm not really noticing that level of like new hardware being used to its most optimal, potential. And maybe that says more about me not necessarily needing a Pro model, but it is what it is in that regards. Now, going back to the camera, one thing that I noticed off the bat in just initial A/B testing, without having had to look at the specs until I had to like validate it, I didn't realize the 0.5 camera got such an update from last year. So I believe the ultra wide lens is 12 megapixels on the previous edition. It got bumped to 48 megapixels on the new 16 Pro Max, which is a nice upgrade, because if you use the 0.5 lens or the ultra wide lens, you might realize that like your photos can kind of like come out a little grainier. They're not as sharp depending on the lighting. With that 48 megapixel sensor, it's definitely going to help improve the overall quality while maintaining that kind of wild field of view. So very nice to see in that regards. And again, there's a lot of other upgrades under the hoods when it comes to the camera. This is Apple's best camera. The photos and the Apple processing is still as consistent as ever. And if you're really like pixel peeping and looking at the details, yeah, this is an even better camera than the previous generation. So no kind of doubts there. But ultimately, this phone and this upgrade is exactly what I expected it to be. While I said it was a disappointing update for me, again, I understand that within the context of consumers as a whole, this is going to be a great phone for a lot of people. And depending on your upgrade path and what you're on now, this is going to be everything you want in a phone, with the newer cameras and maybe that new camera button and the increased battery life and all that stuff. I was just speaking, and I am speaking from the perspective of somebody who, was upgrading from the previous generation, has kind of upgraded year over year, and wasn't all that excited with this year's update. And even now having it and testing it, glad to have it, but no, I don't necessarily or didn't need it. And even now that I have it, it's nothing that, I'm running to the hills about outside of this video and presenting it. So if you want my full thoughts and insight after more usage, be sure to consider subscribing to the channel to check out the full review I have in the weeks to come for the 16 Pro Max. And like this video if you enjoyed it and helped you out in any capacity at all. As always, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching.